Good evening, and I welcome you all on behalf of my team on the second day of Brain Awareness Week, an initiative by International Brain Research Organization, Dana Foundation, and Federation of European Neuroscience Societies. I am Vyoma Shah, the co-organizer of this event, a master's student of neuropsychology and moderator for this event. For the people who have joined us in today, I hope everyone who is here with us is safe and healthy. This lockdown has made a lot think about our mental health, about others' mental health as well. And you know what else people should talk about? The old ideas of detecting liars using non-verbal cues, which is not entirely based on science. To bust those myths today, we have with us Dr. Meghana Srivatsa, who is an independent consultant criminal psychologist with a dual PhD degree from Sweden and the UK. Dr. Srivatsa will be enlightening us on the behavior of an innocent and a guilty suspect in suspect interviewing scenarios. The topic is suspect counter-interrogation strategies. Ma'am, may I request you to guide us into the session?
Thank you, Emma, for the nice introduction. Hi, guys. I hope you're all doing well. It's a strange situation that we're all stuck in, the COVID pandemic. I hope you guys are all staying home, staying safe. Thank you for joining me today on this nice Saturday evening. For your weekend, I'm not sure we can make given the situation, but going in anyway. So today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's probably of personal interest to a lot of us present here, which is criminal behavior, right? So most of us, without having studying this, our idea of criminal behavior is what we get from TV shows, on video streaming channels like Netflix, Amazon Prime, watching movies. So most of us get our background knowledge about what we know about criminal behavior from these shows. So psychological scientists in this area of research, we would like to call it the Hollywood effect, right? Basically, what it means is what we learn from what we find out from Hollywood. Is it entirely true? Is it something that that we should rely on? And what are the findings from science, right? So we watch all these shows every day. I myself watch a lot of them, and let's face it, they're really entertaining, right? It's a lot of fun to watch these shows. And we just go on, watch our movies, and we think, wow, this is amazing, right? Like, we are watching all these shows and we're learning so much every day. And these investigators and detectives are like they have these magical tactics that they use in order to catch criminals, right? And they're really entertaining. We spend hours of our time together watching these shows. And then we have to figure out, is this something that that is true? Or is it something that's based in science? So one of the shows that I used to watch a lot was called Lie to Me. And as the poster clearly says, the subtitle says, the truth is written all over our faces. It's not entirely true though. So here today in this talk, I'm kind of here to burst your bubble a little bit, probably disappoint you in a slight possibility, but at the same time I'm also trying to show you what science has told us over the last 30 to 40 years, and all the research that psychological scientists have conducted in deception detection, right? So why now the point we all need to understand is, if this is not a workable solution, if the things that we see on TV is not really all that true and not really backed in science, why is it so popular? Like, why do these things still go on? And why do people still practice these things? Simple reasons, because like I mentioned earlier, it's entertaining. And a lot of people make money out of these things, right? Whether it's through TV, whether it's through actually practicing, whether it's through giving training, to people using these so-called techniques of lie detection. These are profitable. And imagine if a person could just like look at your face and tell you if you're lying. It's pretty easy, right? Like you have to go to like a few classes, learn these skill sets, and suddenly this whole science becomes so easy. And if that is true, we should be able to catch hold of criminals left, right, and center all over the place, right? It must be so easy. But we are pretty, you know, stuck with this whole process. We're not doing too well. So why does this happen? Why do people keep doing this? Because a lot of research that's been done in this area in the past, or even like sometimes now, is tainted with what we call publication bias. That is, uh, when people are doing research, they don't care about creating actual science. What they care about is getting their name out there and getting papers published in journals, right? Putting their name out there. That's what's important to people, a lot of people in academia. So most of the research that's conducted is not scientifically sound. They're not using the right sampling techniques. They're not using strict practices. They're using low sample sizes. Um, they have small effect sizes. So when I say sample sizes and low effect sizes, what I mean is, let me give you an example. Maybe you'll understand this better, right? So let's say I bake a cake, right? And I have never baked in my entire life. So let's say I bake a cake, okay? And I give the cake to like my parents and my brother and probably my dog, and they're appreciative of it, right? They're like, yeah, this is really good cake, good job, and we're gonna eat this. This is great. So everyone's eating the cake, and I'm like, this is great. I'm pretty good at. Sorry, I think the power just went off. Um, yeah. So they say that, yeah, it's pretty good cake, we like it, this is good. And I'm like, great, I'm good at baking, right? And I say, okay, so there's 4 people who have eaten my cake, okay? And they say I'm good at baking, okay? So I get 100% effect, right? A small sample of 4 people and 100% effect, which means 100% of the people liked it, right? Because 4 out of 4 people liked it. Now, let's say I bake a cake and give it to 30 people, okay? Out of these 30 people, let's say 20 people don't like my cake, but 10 people like it, right? So that reduces the percentage of how many likes and dislikes there are. I mean, people are biased, they like my cake, they say this is good. So the effect size is larger. But the more people I give this to, the more opinions I get about it, the effect size becomes smaller and smaller. So most of the research in deception detection have people using really tiny samples and getting big effect sizes and saying, this works, this is fantastic. It's like 10 people are sweating when they lie, which means their entire population will sweat when they lie. That is not really true, because I sweat when I am nervous, right? I could be innocent, I could not be lying, but I'm just nervous to be in the situation in the first place. So so these things are not strictly monitored when people carry out research. And the last thing is, people don't follow, researchers, especially in psychological sciences, don't follow open science practices. So when I say open science, I mean, you need to make your data open for people to see. You need to make your practices, your methodology open for people to see what you're doing. So there's something called open science framework, where you put up your entire work saying, this is the kind of research I'm going to do. This is my sample size. This is my methodology. This is my design. And you get opinions of other researchers whether this is sound. You could also say, these are the statistical analysis I'm going to do on my data. So you put everything up before you start your research. So everyone can see what you're doing. You're being true to science, you're being transparent, and you're not lying, or you're not trying to conduct a study and get your paper published, because that's ineffective and that is not going to help science in the larger picture, right? So why all these practices that we called as Hollywood effect, carry on the way it is? Then it's simply because of all the reasons we just discussed, right? Because research is not sound. Now, we spoke about what goes bad in the research in this area. Now let's talk about all the research they've conducted in the last 30 to 40 years in deception detection, right? And let's see what they found. So the basic idea is, most of the research work has shown that people, most of the people who have tried to do research in this area have tried to show how nonverbal behavior, like avoiding eye contact, or twitching, or sweating, or like increased heart rate, or like folding your hands and being defensive, things like that. Those are the signs of a person who is lying, right? So we call these as non-verbal behaviors, because the person is not speaking. These are just behaviors you observe on the surface of the person. So research people have tried to use this as science and said that we can detect liars based on their body language, and that is not really true. So let's find out what science has shown so far. So the research on deception detection tries to answer mainly three questions. And this is us trying to move away from the basic ideology that, nonverbal behavior is what you need to find out if a person is lying or telling the truth. So research has tried to answer these three main questions. First one is, what level of accuracy can people judge truth tellers from liars? Which is based on the non-verbal behavior of a person, at what level of accuracy can you actually say this person is lying or telling the truth, right? The second question is, what are the cues to deception, right? And when I say cues to deception, I don't mean non-verbal. I mean, do people who speak the truth speak differently from people who speak lies, right? And the third question is, can we improve ways in which we can detect truth from lies, right? So we're going to answer these questions briefly through the rest of the talk. So we'll talk about accuracy of judgments first. Move the powerless back. Okay. So accuracy of judgment. So what research has found in terms of nonverbal behavior is the so-called lie detection experts get it 54% of the times right overall, right? They can judge whether a person is telling the truth or lying based on their nonverbal behavior 54% of the time. Don't be impressed, because if you just took a guess, the chance of you being right is 50%, because either a person is a liar or a truth teller. So the 50% chances of you being right just taking a wild guess. So 54% is just about chance level, which is absolutely not impressive if you are an expert, right? And what's even more terrifying is researchers dug a bit deeper to try and find out if how they can find out liars specifically and not just truth tellers. And they were accurate about 44% of the times, which is lower than chance level, which is terrifying, because this is a pseudoscience that's been used even today in law enforcement. This is terrifying because a lot of people who have done no wrong, let's just say let's break this down and make this easy to understand. There's 100 people, okay, of which you have guessed about 44 people to be lying based on their body language. Now, there's 56 people who are left, right? And you might make a wrong guess, and these people might be innocent, and they might get stuck, or they might be convicted of a crime they haven't committed because you just made a wrong guess. That is absolutely terrifying, and that is precisely why we need to do a lot of research before we can put these things into practice. And science has clearly shown us that this is something we shouldn't be doing, and we cannot pick out a liar based on their body language, right? Or their physiological or emotional changes. This is absolutely not true. Why is it so hard for us to figure out differences between a truth teller and a liar? Simply because there's not a lot of obvious differences in terms of emotional and nonverbal cues between a truth teller and a liar. As let's say I'm evading eye contact, or I'm restless, or I'm anxious, nervous. These are also things an innocent suspect can exhibit as behaviors, because the person is in a situation where he or she is suspected of a crime he or she did not commit, and that is anxiety provoking, and that is something that will exhibit these behaviors just as much as a liar could. So these differences are really faint. And the second thing is all these so-called non-verbal behaviors that liars exhibit, these are stereotypes, right? And these are things that we believe is true, but it's really not. And of course, it's glorified by your Hollywood, your TV series, and it's so entertaining and so fun to watch. We truly want a magical solution, right? We just want one magical solution that will tell us this person is lying and this is fantastic, right? But it's all based on stereotypes. It is not based in science. Now, what is the way forward? Because clearly I'm sitting here complaining about why we shouldn't do this. So we need to figure out how to do this right. Yeah. So what psychological scientists have done in the last 30 to 40 years is try to move away from tapping behavioral differences of nonverbal and emotional differences between truth tellers and liars, and move towards understanding cognitive differences. So what do I mean by cognitive differences? I mean the thought process, the strategies that liars and truth tellers use. So what are the mental processes that happen between a truth teller and a liar? That's what we are trying to tap, right? So we are not interested in finding out what kind of physical behaviors these two sets of people exhibit. We are only going to tap into what makes them different in terms of their thought processes, right? So how do we find out these thought processes? We use a lot of strategic interviewing approaches. So here, one thing we need to understand at this point is what we generally practice is a concept called interrogation, right? But because of all these other things that we're trying to study, we've moved away from the concept of interrogation versus investigative interviewing. So interrogation tends to be a very confrontational approach. You're trying to get a confession from a person that he or she has committed a crime. That's generally the intention of an interrogation. How is it different from investigative interviewing? Investigative interviewing does not care about a confession. What it cares about is gathering reliable information. We want information that is reliable. We want information that is truthful. We do not want information that is forced or psychologically coerced. And that's the difference between the two approaches. To do this, we need to understand the difference between the basic difference between a truth teller and a liar, right? So a liar is a person who has done something wrong and has lied about his or her actions, about whatever they have done, right? A truth teller does not have to lie about anything because they haven't committed that action. Okay, so let's say a person has committed a murder, right? So that's a bad action, and the person wants to hide that information that he or she has committed a murder. Okay, So the basic difference between a true teller and liar is that a liar has some critical information to conceal, while a true teller does not. The true teller does not have anything to conceal, while the liar has to constantly work around concealing critical information regarding his or her activities in the crime. Okay, so keeping that in mind, we need to see the differences between the cognitive strategies of truth tellers and liars. Now, the information that I just spoke about, the critical information, now truth tellers don't have any critical information to hide, right? So the understanding of science so far is that true tellers or innocent suspects tend to have this illusion of transparency. Now, I'll explain to you what it means. So let's say when I came on this talk, I was really nervous because, I'm like, okay, will I do a good job? Will people understand this? And it's gonna be there till the talk is over, right? And we tend to get nervous. But what we also think is when I'm talking right now, I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, all the people on this talk will know that I'm nervous. So I am transparent, right? So I have this illusion of transparency that whatever internal emotional processes is happening is transparent to the other person who is talking to me, right? So innocent suspects tend to have this illusion of transparency where they think, I am innocent, I am honest, and the other person, the interviewer or the interrogator in front of me, will see that I am my intentions are transparent to this person, and they will see that I am honest if I just speak. That is one of the beliefs that innocent suspects have. The second belief that innocent suspects have is belief in a just world. What this means is the belief that good people will get good and bad people will get bad consequences, and not the other way around. So innocent suspects tend to believe that if I am cooperative, if I tell whatever is required, if I tell all the information that I have, and if I'm just honest, that's good enough. And the person who is interviewing me will see this and will understand that I'm being truthful, right? So in terms of cognitive load, what do I mean by cognitive load? Cognitive load is the mental load that a person has if he or she is trying to hide information, right? Since truth tellers have nothing to hide, their mental thought processes is not heavy. It's very light, it's very straightforward, it's very simple. So the weight is low, right? So what kind of counter interrogation strategies do they have? So what are counter interrogation strategies? So when the strategies that suspects use to convince an interviewer that they're innocent are called counter interrogation strategies, right? So basically, I strategize that, yeah, this is how I'm going to tell my story to convince the interviewer that I'm innocent, that I did not commit this crime. So that consists of my counter interrogation strategies, right? So for innocent suspects, the counter interrogation strategy is them being very forthcoming, being very honest, and they understand that if I'm just honest, I'll tell everything, I'll be cooperative, and that's the strategy I'm going to use because they have nothing to hide, right? So in comparison, liars would have the exact opposite structure of this, right? So liars, for them, information management strategies is more complex than tellers, right? So liars have critical information that they need to hide from the person to find out that they committed a murder. So they need to hide this information. So that is one of the most important thing for them. Now, how do they try and conceal this information? Okay, so the next bit, the perception of interviewer's knowledge, what that means is when, let's say, I am a suspect in an interview, right? And this interviewer is asking me all these questions. Now, if I lie about it bluntly, if let's say the interviewer is asking me a question about whether I was present at a crime scene, okay, and I bluntly say, no, I wasn't there, I have no idea what you're talking about. And let's say the interviewer actually has CCTV evidence showing that I was actually there. The interviewer will know that I'm lying, and which means the interviewer knows that I'm trying to hide something, and that's why I'm lying, right? So it is important for a liar to gauge how much information the interviewer might already know about my involvement in crime. So I have to, as and when the interviewer asks me questions, I have to gauge, okay, does this person have any information already? Does he already know that I might be involved in something? Does he already have some evidence against me? So these are things that they have to constantly gauge. So what does all this mean? It means that the mental processes are really complex, a lot more complex than a truth teller's mental process. There's a lot more cognitive load, right? Their mind is heavy with thinking consistently from the beginning of the interview till the end to convince the interviewer that they're innocent, that they did not commit a crime. And in connection to that, the counter interrogation strategies would be avoidance or denial, which means um, liars tend to avoid telling the truth. Like they'll find a way around telling the truth, or they just blatantly deny. If they feel that the interviewer does not have any information against them, or if they don't have any solid evidence against them, then they just deny committing the crime. So these are the strategies that is common to that is followed by liars. Um, so the next thing we need to ask is, so how do we get this? How do we get this information, right? Because now we understand that the way liars think versus the way truth tellers think, the strategies that they use, their mental processes are completely different from each other, right? So having this knowledge, we need to know how we need to tap all this information, right? So how do we do that? We do it through investigative interviewing. So we can, there are a lot of techniques depending on the need of the interview, or rather what outcome interviewers are looking for. There are multiple ways of doing this. But some of the simpler, straightforward ways of how can we use whatever information we already have about the person, the suspect involved in the crime, how can we use that strategically to formulate our questions in order to gather more information? Another thing we discussed about previously was perception of interviewers' knowledge, right? Perception of interviewers' knowledge. Now, how can we manipulate that? How can we use this? Let's say I am an interviewer and I hold some evidence against me. So at what point in time in the interview should I reveal this evidence? Should I just say, I have all this evidence, I know you've done this crime, so this is what it is? Or should I just like gather more information, and formulate my questions, use the evidences in parts, and make sure that the suspect talks more than me talking, and collect all this information and then probably reveal evidence? Is that a good way to do it? So there are multiple ways of doing this, but these are things that we as interviewers should keep in mind. The second thing we can do is manipulating the cognitive load, which means one of the observations that researchers have made is uh, when before they come to an interview, innocent suspects and guilty suspects have their own strategies of what they're going to do in the interview. So generally, innocent suspects as we have discussed earlier, or truth tellers, as we have discussed earlier, they don't have a fancy strategy. They basically just come and say, hey, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to tell whatever I know. And that's it, that's their strategy, right? They don't have any complex strategy. But guilty suspects tend to have a complex strategy. They say, I'm going to formulate a solid story, that will explain everything that has happened in the crime, but it's not going to convict me of the crime. So they're going to have a very straightforward, structured story that they formulate. And they tend to stick to the story, right? So what we as interviewers can do is increase their cognitive load. So the cognitive load right now is, I stick to the story, and as long as I get it right and it explains everything, I might come off as innocent. What can we do as interviewers? We kind of add to this load, right? Because we know that, okay, there's a possibility that they have rehearsed the story. So kind of deviate from their general story, kind of take them off guard and put something else in between that will kind of detour them from the story that they're following, right? That adds to their mental load, and that kind of gives us cues in terms of whether a person is lying or telling the truth. And like I said, effective questioning tactics. How do we phrase questions? What is the right way of phrasing questions? For example, we cannot ask leading questions. So asking questions like, uh, were you holding the knife, or did you stab the person with a knife? Asking leading questions like this, especially to an innocent suspect, will kind of not help the interviewer gather good information. And this is also putting thoughts into the person's mind. It's better that we ask broader questions, something like, instead of going specifics into did you stab this person, to say, can you tell me what you did while you were here in this place? Can you tell me what happened? A very broad question so that they speak. Because the moment we put a thought into the person's head, it kind of disrupts, what information we are wanting. So yeah, so this is basically the idea of how we interview suspects to gather good information, reliable information, and when we get into the information that we have collected, then we can find out more about whether the statements are credible or not credible, whether the person has lied or told the truth, right? We can pick out all the nitty-gritties of it once we have all this information with us. Now, we have done this for the last 30-40 years. So you might ask, why is it that then they're not using it everywhere? This seems like a pretty good thing to do, right? Because it's this way we are doing it, right? People tend to not do this because it takes a lot more work. It takes an interviewer to be a good interviewer. It takes training, it takes practice, it takes patience, it takes time. And people tend to not have all those in luxury these days, and they want an easy magical solution to fix their problems. And that's most likely why people don't practice it, even if we as academicians or scientists have shown that there are better ways of doing this. While a lot of countries across the world are moving into this direction, India, for example, is still struggling with age-old practices. And it's not because we don't want to move forward, it's just because a lot of people don't know this. And when they know this, they're so used to doing it the way they've done it for most of their lives, they don't want to move away from what they're already doing because it's convenient, right? So that's where we end up not doing things right. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you about today. And here are the references that I used. If you're interested, if you want to go in depth and read some more about what we spoke about today, here are the references. Feel free to read them. And yeah, that's about it.